What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over some more inventory updates. So, this is going to essentially finalize all of the static item method inventory logic. I'm also going to fix some bugs with the non-static inventory logic. We had an episode previously that was wrapping up and combining all of our inventory logic, and it worked well. However, I had mentioned several times throughout these episodes that you should probably only pick one or the other because there's not really a usage for both in a game, as you can only toggle one on and off. With that said, I still went ahead and did both in this project because, well, why not? Because this project I'm trying to allow everyone to make their game. However, there were some bugs with some of these methods. And so what I'm doing today is going to be fixing up all the bugs I'm aware of, as well as, like I said, finalizing these static items. Okay, so I have two different methods here that I would love to show. And these methods are, I'll go over them again in depth. So we have our item static. We have this Boolean on our game mode is where I put it for now. And really this is just for a template. You would only ever need one or the other. So let's think about if items are static. That's the first case here. If items are static, what this means is we can pick up an item, use it from our inventory, and then once we're done with it, we can put it away and we are good. We cannot level this item up. We cannot have it be destructible. We cannot have these certain things about it. Because what happens is once we put it away, it gets destroyed and then we spawn a new one in our character's hand. So this is really for if we just have these items that are constantly in our inventory once we acquire them, and they don't really have other modifications that can be done to them. I can just pick them up, use them, and put them away when I'm done with them. And the same goes for the armor. So if I equip the armor and the helmet, I can do the same thing here. So I can equip chestplate, helmet, okay, and unequip them. Alright, now what was happening is since I had references to objects that were here, when I open my inventory up again, those object references were destroyed since they were tied to the widget. And so if I were to try and do something like unequip my sword, it would actually just spawn another one first, and then I would click it again to despawn it. So I'm fixing that issue with the armor and the weapons today. Technically this didn't happen with items, even though we haven't finished items yet. They are consumable, so they're used immediately, and so we didn't have any sort of equipping logic with them, but you could do this with items too if you wanted. So we're getting this method sorted. Don't worry about these errors. These errors are related to the map component, and they're related to when we pick up an item, the icon is still on the minimap. I have not fixed them yet intentionally because I want to show some things off with this in the next episode for maps. So I've left that alone, so ignore those errors. However, there is an alternative method, which is if items are not static. And if items are not static, this means that we actually have a reference to these items. So as we use it, we spawn it into the scene, and we take it away. What we're really doing is making it invisible and detaching it from the character, resetting all his data about it, and it's technically just sitting there invisible. We're going to do more with this in the future for memory management reasons, but the reason I've done it like that for now is so that we can keep data about it. You wouldn't really know this right now because we don't have any sort of crafting system or damage on our weapons like durability, but because we still have a reference to that object, even though it's invisible, when I spawn it back into my hand, it would have the same details as before. Now, what that means is that if we were to go attack an opponent, say we could hit 5 times with the sword before it would break. Say I hit an opponent 3 times with it, okay? Let's just do 1 for the sake of this. Say I hit it once. I would be able to use it 4 more times. Well, with the items being static, if that's the way it worked, when I disconnected this, and I destroyed it, if I respawned it, I would be able to use it 5 times again. But with this method, the R item static set to false, this means the durability would still be 4. So it keeps data that is relevant between usage. Now, one final thing before we get into the episode, just so you're aware, and I have mentioned this before, but if you're not using Unreal's data tables, you could use a database like SQL and keep track of this data regardless of the method you use. So you can pick a method that you like and that fits you better for performance and for the needs of your game. However, like I said, I'm doing them both for the sake of the tutorial and for the template, and I don't like to leave anything undone. I'm going to mainly be using the method where the items are not static. Going forward, that's the method I'm going to be using because we're going to be covering crafting, durability, and leveling up attributes of our actual items, both armor and weapons. So I'm going to need to use the items not being static. So however you handle it, it's fine. I just want to make this episode to clear everything up that our items and weapons could have, any issues that might be related to them, and things like that. So we're going to wrap this up. That way we can move forward with other elements of our inventory, as well as making it look nicer. Okay. So with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So if you'd like to get caught up in the series, and you click this icon in the top right corner right here, check out the entire playlist and everything we've done to get to this point. Alternatively, you can go ahead and click this video right here in the top right corner. And what that is that's the first episode of the inventory. So we've done quite a bit since then, but you can go ahead and get caught up on the inventory specific modules if you want to be able to replicate the inventory systems that we have today. Okay. And now we are ready to begin. So, now that I've explained kind of everything about each method, let's go to the R item stat static. We want to make sure we wrap up everything with this today. And to do that, there is one major bug that we have to address. I mentioned it in the opening, but essentially if I had a sword, okay, and I unequipped it, equipped it, great. But if I leave it equipped, and then I open up my inventory, close it, and open it back up, when I would try to press the button again, it would actually spawn another sword, and I would stay in my stance. I'd have to press the button twice. That's a major issue that we would have to fix. Okay, we don't want that to happen. So that's what we're really here to resolve. But we have to do that for armor as well. So the different types of armor would function the same when it came to that bug. So if I had a helmet or a chest plate already equipped, and I were to try and equip it again to unequip it, it would actually just put another chest plate there or another helmet there as opposed to unequipping. All right, so for that method, we need to make sure that our item stats are static. So if you're either using this method or if you are going the route that I am with the using both methods. So I'm going to leave that guy checked, and then we're going to start in single inventory item. So the logic for spawning the weapons and putting them away, equipping them and unequipping them, is it occurs from the single inventory item widget. When we actually select the item that we're going to use, that's when our logic fires. So I'm going to show you what I did to change it to make it work for all cases. I'm going to give a quick rundown of this entire system again. So starting from the top, we have confirm item and on pressed item button. So when we either press a manual key or input to confirm that selection, or we click on it with the mouse, we go in and we grab the stats we need. So we check and see if the game mode has our item stat static set to true or false. For this case, we only care about the true. Now, before, this was all going to the same thing. Okay, when we first started and we separated this for the series, we had this branch going to the same logic. We weren't actually separating the behavior. If anything, all we were doing was we were taking the object reference and only doing this if it was valid. You can see how this has changed a bit now. So what we do is we grab our object reference, check if it's valid or not. If it is valid, we can actually skip straight ahead. Okay, we can do the same thing that the false does, because if we have an object reference here, whether the stats are static or not, if we have something we can reference, we can do the same thing with it. Then we just go into our switch statement, which determines our use item logic, attach weapon logic, remove weapon logic, or remove equipment logic, and attach equipment logic. That's what the switch does. It brings us to the appropriate logic based on the type of the item that we selected. And that's good, and that's functional. But there was a case we never accounted for this Boolean. So if the object reference is not valid and our item stats are static, okay, what that means is exactly this. So when we close our inventory, open it back up, we get every element in our inventory gets an option, and we can select it. Like if I get the helmet, you can see I have basic sword, basic helmet. Okay, well, With the static items, remember they get destroyed upon cleanup. They're not kept as object references. So what that means is that if I were to close my menu here, I lose track of my object reference. So when I come back into it, what would happen is it would have to create a new one. Well, we don't want to create a new one. Instead, what we would like to do is make it to where we could get the appropriate object as well as the data from it. So even if it's static, if the character is holding an item, we know that they have something they are currently using, regardless if the inventory window has been closed or not. And that's what we're here to solve right now. So I've added a function in here in the is not valid case of the object reference. If it's not valid, we're going to do this logic. This is how we are going to retrieve all of our items data for our character's current inventory items, even if we're using the static methods. As long as the player has it equipped, we can get the data from it. So I went ahead and I added a new function, and I called it determine equip logic for static items. All right, in here, this is actually, there's quite a bit going on because there are a lot of different cases here. So we need to make sure we set everything properly depending on all of our item types. First things first, when we come in here, come into our new function, we need to determine what type of item this is. So we can grab the item type. Now, what's funny is we have object reference, which can have an item type, or we have the item type on this actual button. This is important, okay? The item that gets spawned does have an item type, and we've used that in some places. Even if we look back in the event graph, we use it, okay? However, when we're in our inventory, we don't want to use the object reference because the only way we call this function is if the object reference is not valid. So we had an item type here, which was going to be used for images and such, but we can also use it for the logic here. So if we grab our item type, get it, and then we can perform a switch on it. Okay? And that's what I've done here. Now, if it's an item, I call the function we already have called retrieve item from ID from table. And what this does is, I'm not going to go over this entire function because we've been over this a lot, but essentially we're going to go in here, we're going to determine what type of item it was that we clicked on, and we're going to spawn it and set it to our object reference. So in this case, in the case of an item, that's good to go because we don't care about equipping or unequipping logic. The thing here is that we're spawning a new actor, and since we can't really hold like items with the type of item because they're just consumables, this is perfectly fine. But for weapons and equipment, it's a little bit different because we spawn another actor. And so if we spawn an actor every time, we're going to have like 2 swords, 2 chest plates, and we don't want that. Okay? So if it's a weapon, we do different logic. Equipment is the most complicated, so we'll just continue down the chain and start with weapon. All right. So in the case of a weapon, we need to determine what the character is already holding, and then we can set that to our object reference and set the appropriate data about that object. Now, the way we can determine what the character is holding is this. We can get the owning player pawn. This single inventory item belongs to the inventory widget, which is owned by the character that opens it. So this owning player pawn is going to be the character with the inventory we care about. We still have to cast it to the right type to be able to grab data from it. So we're going to cast it to our base character BP. Just like this. All right. Now, off the base character BP, we want to get current weapon. And we want to right-click on it and convert to validated get, because this gives us our is valid and is not valid. Okay? If we're assuming right now the character can only have one weapon. In the case of being able to hold multiple weapons for static items, you will have to change this and check for both. But we're not there yet, and I will genuinely cover that. Even though I said that I'll be going forward with the non-static weapons method, with this disabled, I can still fix things as we add things that both methods can support it. But we don't currently have that right now. So we only care about one weapon. So if the weapon is currently valid, we can easily just set the object reference equal to the weapon. Literally, take the current weapon, set object reference. It's that simple. We don't even have to retrieve what element or what weapon it is from the table that we just selected. We just grab our current weapon and say, yep, that's the object reference. The reason for this is because if we have a weapon and we're selecting a weapon, what we're really doing is we're going to unequip the weapon that we currently have. The method I have currently shown in the graph right now is that it works like this. So if I equip a sword, or basically any weapon, close my menu, open my menu again, and then select a different option, it's going to clear my option but not equip the other weapon. It's a little awkward, but you can then simply equip the other weapon with another button press. If you put images here with your sword or dagger, then it would be no problem and it would be easy enough to understand, but it is an extra button press that's not really required. So with that method, what we're doing is we're just immediately setting the object reference to the current weapon, because whatever weapon we're holding, we're saying, yep, this is the object reference. And we want to unequip it because we don't know what weapon we have. We didn't have an object reference before because current weapon was valid. But remember, the only way we get into here is if object reference is not valid. So we just set that right away, and we set object reference to be is equipped. That way, when we leave this logic, we go into the switch, say it's a weapon, we go in here and we see is equipped is true, meaning we go through the logic to remove the weapon. All right. So with that in mind, that's working well. But if it's not valid, we have to retrieve the item for this button from the table. Retrieve item from ID from table. Okay. It's this guy, remember? And we want to do this. If it's a weapon, it's going to determine what row we're on based on the ID of this button and set all the data for the weapon and spawn it. So that's actually a simpler method. And then we just want to make sure that we set the object reference to not be equipped. That way when we go back to the event graph, it's going to say is equipped as false, and it can go through the equipping logic and the attachment logic of the weapon. So it's actually pretty simple in theory, but say you want to just automatically go to the weapon or go to the equipment that you have. Okay, so that way you don't have to. So for example, let's just show it instead of trying to explain it. Let's pick up the chest plate and the helmet. All right, now if I equip the chest plate and not the helmet, we exit the menu, open it back up, and then equip the helmet, you'll notice that it doesn't take me 2 clicks or 2 button presses to get the helmet on. It just worked right away. And that's because of the logic we have under the equipment switch. We'll add this to the weapon in a second, but I just want to show you the difference. I love giving options when I can. So if the item type is equipment, we're going to go through the same basic logic as we did for the weapon, where we get the owning player pawn, cast it to the base character BP, get the current item from it. In this case, we're going to grab the current helmet. Okay, so get current helmet. And I'm going to use a convert to validated get to make it look like this. Now, in this case, you see it's different than what I did here. So even if the helmet's valid, I still retrieve the item from ID from table. So I still determine what item this button has. And this is because I want to compare and see if they're the same class. If they're the same class, then I can go ahead and assume that I don't need both of them and then do the appropriate logic. All right? But if they're not the same class, I can say, okay, I just want to equip that one. If they're the same class, I want to unequip the one I have. So to put it more simply, it's like this. If current helmet is valid, it means the character currently is wearing a helmet. When we call retrieve item from ID from table, it goes into this function I keep showing you. And what it's going to do is go into the equipment branch, determine what item it is that we clicked on the inventory, spawn it, and set it to the object reference. That way we know what object was just spawned from this item. When that is done, object reference will have data. So it's valid now. And so we can check its class against the class of the helmet. Now, even though you can change stats about each item or helmet in their individual blueprints, say you have multiple helmets. You have like a standard helmet and you have like the Dragon God Slayer helmet. Okay, if you have these 2 different helmets, they're going to be different classes one way or another. Even if they're subclasses of each other, they are not the exact same class. So, instead of comparing individual objects, since we know they're not the same object, we just spawn the object, whereas the character was already wearing a helmet. they can still have the same class, even though they can't be the same object. So we get class of the object reference, and then we get class of the helmet. Then we just do an equal operator to check if the classes are equal, pass them into each other. If they are equal, then this means we have found the object that we want to remove. So I can go ahead and destroy my object reference. Sounds funny, right? But because the object reference is a separate object from the current helmet right now, we just spawned to check the classes. So if we actually kept it in there, we would have two helmets. Even though they would go through the same attachment logic, it would actually spawn another one in the scene, and we don't want to deal with that. So if they are the same class, we go ahead and just destroy the duplicate that we made just for checking purposes. We instead set the object reference to the current helmet. See that? Just like how we were setting the current weapon to the object reference right here, we're doing the same thing, just we're setting helmet to the object reference. And then we're saying it is equipped because we know that we want to remove it if we select that option again in the inventory. All right, now there's a few other options here. There's the false if these classes are not equal. What this means is that current helmet is valid. The character is wearing a helmet, but the object that we clicked on was a different type of helmet or a different piece of armor altogether. So for example, it could be, let's say it was boots. All right. Well, if it's boots, we don't want to destroy that new object we selected, and we don't want to overwrite the current helmet or overwrite the object reference to what the current helmet is. That would mean we had boots that became the helmet. That doesn't make sense. We don't want that. So if these classes aren't equal, we go into the false. Now, in the false, we still want to destroy the object reference. Don't get me wrong. And we're destroying it because at the end of the day, it is still a duplicate spawned actor. So we still want to delete that duplicate. We're going to check for our actual, see if we have it equipped anywhere else, like on our chest, for example. Okay, so we're not quite done yet. Let me clean this up for you. I did not realize that this was overlapping. I apologize. We'll put it something like that. Okay, and so what we're doing is we're grabbing the base character BP now, and we're going to check against the current chest instead. One thing to note here, you see both is not valid and the false from this branch come over here. Only the false from the branch goes into the object reference destroy. This is important. Retrieve item from ID from table is what sets object reference. So if current helmet is not valid, we skip this logic entirely, which means object reference will be invalid. We have no need or want to destroy this actor. So if it's false, we destroy the actor, then go to the current chest, check. But if current helmet's not valid at all, meaning the character is not wearing a helmet, we can skip both all of this logic and the destruction of the object reference. Okay, so if it's not valid, it just goes into this check. Like I said, we're grabbing the current chest now. Just like this, and we're going to convert it to a validated get. When we do this, we're doing the same thing as we did above with the helmet, so you can actually copy the logic if you want. We're going to spawn the item again and try it out for a second time, just like we did with the helmet. It's important to note, this isn't actually required. You could just keep the reference you have from the first one and not destroy it after the false, but it was getting messy here with all the logic, and I didn't want to make it more confusing than it was. So even though technically we do have to spawn more objects this way, it is cleaner to read. You can feel free to just clean it up and separate this logic a little bit more and get rid of that extra spawn if you are going this route. Okay. But what we're going to do is check this item that gets spawned, same as we did before, okay? So we're going to look and we're going to see, straighten this up a little bit so it looks a little bit nicer. We're going to look and we're going to see if the object that was just spawned from this item again, and see if it is equal in class to the current chest. So again, you could have chest plate, or you could have like the Dragon God Slayer chest plate, or you could have the Inferno armor, you know, whatever. Well, that's not the same class as the basic chest plate that I have on. If it is the same class, if it is two basic chest plates, then we're going to do the same thing we did with the helmet. We're going to destroy our object reference because we no longer need that duplicate, and then we're going to set the object reference to the current chest. Then we're just going to drag off the object reference and set is equipped to true. because, again, we're removing it at this point. We've made the same selection that we had on, so we're going to remove it. Now, let's say it's false. Then we go into our same destroy actor logic that we did after the helmet. In this case, it's actually not necessary for me to do this at all, or retrieve another item from the table, because I could just literally grab it from here and set it to be is equipped. However, the reason I've done this here, yet again, is so that all paths, even if we have no helmet, no chest, can still retrieve an object reference. So like I just said before, it's just to keep things a little bit cleaner for the tutorial's sake. Don't worry, if you want to do it a different way, that's perfectly fine. So we destroy our actor on false because they're not the same class, and then we're going to retrieve the new object reference and set the object reference to be is equipped false. That way, if we have no helmet, no chest, we can go ahead and just equip this item. We can attach it the next time we go around. Alright? Now, it's okay if that's a little bit confusing. I intentionally left the weapon one a little bit older. That way we can do it together. Okay, so let's go ahead and do just that. Let's work on it together. So, starting from here, okay, we have our cast to our base character BP, and we grab our current weapon, assuming we can only have one right now, like I mentioned earlier. So we have our current weapon, and we need to determine if it's the same class as the class that would be spawned from selecting this option in the inventory. So instead of just setting the object reference like this, and then equipping it, we want to see if it's the same type or not, because that changes how we set up our logic down here. Now, we could just copy this logic if you want, but I'll go ahead and write it. So even if the current weapon is valid, we want to call our retrieve item from ID from table, because we still want object reference to become a thing, okay? We still need to see if the object reference that is spawned from this button is equal to the weapon we already have. So I'm going to move this logic over. That's the first thing we need to do. All right. Now what we need to do is check and see if our object reference, which will now be valid, is going to be the same class as current weapon. All right. So we can grab current weapon, get class, just like this. We're probably going to need a little bit more space here, so I'll space things out a little bit, make this a little bit cleaner as I can. All right, so hook that guy up, and now we're checking to see if these classes are equal or not. We want to do equal to compare them, and we simply want to drag these into a branch. Now, if they are equal, what we can do is actually destroy our object reference actor, and then set the object reference to the current weapon like we did here. All right, so if they are equal, do this, and we'll get object reference, destroy actor, because we want to get rid of that duplicate we made, remember? There we go. Now, we still have the false, though. If the classes are not equal, then that means we want to equip this new item. So we have to do the opposite. And in this case, we don't have to do that weird thing that I was telling you about where we destroy it just to spawn it again, because we only have the weapon as a whole. We're not separating it based on like helmet, chest, boots, whatever. So I'll show you the alternative. That way you can apply it if you'd like. So the false, instead of destroying the object reference, is to just leave the object reference what it is, but then set it to be is equipped is false. So on the false here, we can, let's actually just copy object reference and say set is equipped, and we're going to set it to false, just like that. All right, I know this is a little tight the way it's in here, but that's essentially what we want to do, because what this means is if the classes are not equal to each other, if it's false, then we know that we want to equip the item that we selected, as opposed to simply unequipping the weapon that we were holding like before. So let's look at our logic now. So I pick up the sword, and I pick up the dagger. Now, I use the sword, enable it, close my menu, open the menu again, go down to the dagger. You see when I select it, I automatically have the dagger equipped. I don't have to double press. Of course, when I'm in the menu, it works just the same. And we can even go the other way. If I have the dagger equipped and I equip the sword, it goes to it in one click. So there you go, guys. That's how you can make that static items method work fully for what we currently have. If you get into dual wielding weapons, you will have to check against both. Kind of similar to how we checked against the current helmet and the chest. You saw how it was two different things that we checked. It would be similar to that. You would have to check against each of your weapons. And like I said, just make sure you add this function call to if the object reference is not valid and items are static. All right. Now, I know that was a bit confusing, so I apologize. But now you can fully use your static items in all cases that we have in the series to date. All right, and that means that we can leave that there safe and sound without touching it. We can focus on the modifiable weapons and memory management for those weapons, saving out the weapons and loading them in with that data. So there's a lot we can do with the other types. For the static, we're good. We're set. Don't have to worry about it. But I wanted to wrap that up for you guys. There's also one minor bug I want to fix with the non-static items. So if you're using that method, this is still useful to you. And what that's going to be is this right here. So sometimes if you were to equip multiple weapons and then swap back and forth between them, you would get stuck in the state where you could not equip or unequip a weapon. Your character was kind of just standing there like this, and you could press the button and want to ever activate. And then you would click on a different weapon or item and it would activate. So just there was a little bit of mismatch with is equipped logic there that was causing a problem. So I'm just going to go over what I have here. It'll be really quick. So once we get to this point where we check and see is it equipped, then we go into removing the weapon that we currently have or attaching another one. And same with the equipment where we remove the equipment that we already had or attaching another one. At the end of all four of these, I have is equipped logic. And what we were doing is we're grabbing the object reference. If it's valid after removing the weapon, then I was setting is equipped to be false because the weapon has been removed. Okay. After attaching the weapon, I was setting is equipped to be true because the weapon has been attached. Now, I did talk about that before. And same with the equipment. If we're removing equipment, then I'm setting the object reference to be equipped as false because it's been removed. Otherwise, the equipment has been attached. And so if it's attached, then it is currently equipped. Okay, so I'm setting it to be true. Those are the four places I'm setting it in this widget. However, actually, there is something else we have to think about. This is just the object reference. The object reference is related to this specific widget. So still, closing the widget can cause problems even for an existing item. Even if it's not a static item, if we're using this widget's item anywhere, it's important that we keep track of where we're setting the values for it. So this widget's object reference is equipped is used to determine when the menu is still open to make sure we set the right value. See, is equipped, is not equipped, is equipped, is not equipped. And we can do this as a visual thing. We can have it green or red or show the image or hide the image based on if it's equipped or not. But there's one other thing we need to do because there is another case. If we happen to close the inventory widget, we lose access to checking the object references is equipped. So to fix that, what we can do is go into the base weapon BP and base equipment BP for all of the spots where we were setting the visibility of the item to be invisible, and then set the item to not be equipped anymore manually in here. That way, even if we lose reference by closing the inventory, the weapon itself still has the proper boolean set on it. So specifically what I'm referring to is remove weapon in base weapon BP and detach equipment in base equipment BP. If you notice, these are the functions that get called from single inventory item. We call remove weapon here, which directly calls this event right here, which I'll get into in a second. And single inventory item also calls remove equipment, which if we go into base equipment BP and go to the remove equipment event, We made a function for this one called detach equipment because its behavior was a little bit different than weapons. And so attached equipment is where we go into our logic here to hide it. All right. So if we follow this event over, we come to a spot where we check our item stat static and we destroy it if they are, or we set it to be invisible if they're not. After setting it to be invisible if they're not, we want to make sure that we take the item here, current weapon in this case, and set is equipped to be false before continuing along the chain of setting the owner to none and resetting current weapon. This is just so we get that Boolean set correctly on the item before we actually reset it and lose that reference to it. And same with the base equipment BP, like I said. Through attach equipment, we go through here until we get to the point where we check our item stat static. If they are, we just destroy it. And if they're not, then we just hide it for now. But same thing as before, we want to make sure that we actually set is equipped to be false. We want to make sure that it is set on the item properly before removing that reference to it. So make sure it's not equipped anymore, and the equipment knows that. I can show this working by picking up 2 or 3 weapons either way. We can pick up all of them if we want, or just 2 of them. And then when you select them, you can go through them without them ever having a lapse where they don't show up in the character's hand or they're just invisible and you can't equip them. I can even close the menu and everything still works as intended, whether I select the same item or I select a different item in the list. So there we go, guys. Now our inventory is fully functional, and we can actually use this, either method, depending on how you want, without any issues of switching weapons or keeping multiple weapons and equipment in your inventory. That's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon members, and subscribers. Thank you all for the love and support. I'm incredibly grateful for everything that you do. I'm so excited to continue showing you episodes week after week. I'm glad you guys are enjoying them as well. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free. I'd be happy to assist you with any issues you ran into. We'll get you all sorted so you can work on the next episode. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.